Right, here we are at the south gate of Exeter, and if you look that way you can see the walls stopping. This is Exeter's Roman walls, much repaired, and if you go that way you can see the wall again. Okay, now the reason why it's important here is because this is where I think that the Vikings, closely followed by King Alfred and his troops, arrived at Exeter after the Vikings had fled from Wareham in 876. So the reason I think that is because if we go that way, there's this road here eventually connects onto the A30, and that road eventually would have gone along more or less the current road to Honiton and onwards towards Dorchester, and eventually a link down to Wareham, which is where the Vikings originally were. We know that that road would have remained in existence until Anglo-Saxon times, because a lot of it is used today. Similarly, the other route that could have been taken is a lower route which comes from Wareham to Dorchester to Bridport, and then branches off somewhere near Charmouth and cuts through Colliford and Sidford, and that would arrive here as well. So whichever route, and we also think that route would have still been in existence because a lot of that is more or less used today as well. So whichever route that the Vikings would have taken, it seems that they would have arrived here at the south gate. I think they would have taken the Roman roads because the Vikings were being pursued by King Alfred. They would have taken the quickest route possible, and that seems to be that would have been the Roman roads. Anyway, so they would have come here, I think, in 876, and would have been closely pursued by Alfred, and they would have gone into Exeter. The sources don't say precisely where the Vikings went, but they went into a fortification. We don't really know whether the fortification was Exeter as it was itself with the walls, which were originally Roman walls, or whether it was a fortification within the walls. The only fortification that exists, form of fortification that exists today, is the site of Rougemont Castle, which we will go to later. That was a later structure built in the fight against William the Conqueror after the Norman invasion. But it seems likely, or even possible, that there would have been a pre-existing building there because Saxon masonry has been found in the wall. So, putting all that together, one can imagine the Vikings and King Alfred arriving here, going here up this street here, which is South Street in Exeter, going up to the main crossroads, which have been there since Roman times, which is the crossroads between South Street, North Street, Fore Street and High Street, and turning right at High Street and heading towards Rougemont Castle, what we now call a Rougemont Castle. So I think this is a very important spot. You can find it quite easily. It's a bit of a traffic nightmare, as you can probably see as we pan around. But if we go over here near this church, you can see there's actually a plaque behind just that car there. You can see it on the wall. It tells you where the south gate is, and if you look at the floor here, the pavement, you can see the actual south gate is marked out. Now the south gate lasted until I think it was something like 1862, because it was originally a prison, but it was knocked down in the end. Not the original south gate as it would have been in Saxon times or Roman times, but obviously much. What we were talking about at the south gate was the land-based Viking and Viking forces, where they would have come into Exeter. They also had a navy, and we know that when they left Wareham, they lost approximately 120 ships off the coast at Swanage in bad weather. Now, that probably wasn't all of their fleet. Nobody's so unlucky to lose the whole of their fleet. So they would have had a navy that would have come to Exeter at the same time as the land-based forces, probably a little bit after, because it takes more time to sail around here, especially in bad weather, than it does to ride straight across. So then that raises the question as where they would have come, and it seems likely that they would have come up the Exe. I mean, they could have come to Topsham, that's another alternative, but there's no evidence for either. If they came to Topsham, they would have probably arrived at the south gate of Exeter as well. But they could have arrived here. Now, there wasn't a gate in the wall at this place, and if we look just straight ahead, you can see the wall in this area. There was something called a water gate that was built after the Saxon period, so we don't think it was that, but there could have been a wall somewhere down here, because, you know, obviously if you've got a Roman town, Roman walls, and then used in Saxon periods and so on, you would want access to the river, so it seems likely that there would have been a gate. So it seems that the Vikings, which on my hypothesis would have held themselves up at the site of Rougemont Castle, would have been awaiting their fleet and their soldiers on the boats, and the soldiers on the boats would have arrived here and gone through the gate there and joined them at Rougemont Castle. While all this was happening, of course, the Vikings did a deal with King Alfred, and they had surrendered, and they decided to leave Wessex, because the Vikings, when they were at Wareham, they had done a deal with Alfred there to leave Wessex. And what happened in the middle of the night, they left rather than leave Wessex. They actually snuck away and rowed across and sailed round to Exeter. So the Vikings didn't really escape, because they had to encounter King Alfred here, and in their depleted numbers they did give up, and they moved to, according to one account, to Gloucester. Obviously this wasn't the end of the Vikings, but this was the end of the crisis of 876. So we've just walked a few more paces onto the River Exe itself, and you can imagine in 876 what was left, the bedraggled remains of the almost completely wrecked Viking fleet sailing up here, not knowing perhaps that their land-based forces, perhaps at Rougemont Castle, but in any case at Exeter, had given in to King Alfred. So they would have arrived, and they would have made their way through a gate into Exeter. The site where we are is actually just outside the gates of Exeter, and they would have found themselves to where the rest of the Vikings were, and found perhaps that they had already left. Actually, that's not true, because there is evidence that the Vikings were given permission to overwinter by King Alfred. So they only left for Gloucester by one account. They only left Wessex after the winter, so they would have been camped somewhere around, or even in Exeter, we don't know where. So very interesting. So on this video I'm not going to do every gate of the four main gates in Exeter's walls, but this is the site of the West Gate. We were just passing it, so I thought I'd do a quick video. There's not a lot, well, there isn't any gate to see, but it's actually a very interesting spot with old buildings and so on.
That's nice, yeah.
So this would be the gate that would have led towards the west of Devon, and obviously Cornwall beyond. May have been important when there was later on in the 10th century there was a diocese set up in St. Germans. That might have been significant then. Nearly got run over, but so it may have been. This gate may have been significant for anything going west, obviously, out of Exeter. So that's the West Gate. I'm in Rougemont Northern Hay Gardens. Over the other side of this wall is Rougemont Gardens, and this is the outline of Rougemont Castle, which was also this line here was the Roman wall and medieval wall. Built and repaired on the same line. The reason why I've chosen this location is, and that's Athelstan's tower. If you see it on the map, there's rumours that Athelstan repaired the walls in the 10th century. We don't know whether he did or not, but somebody, not me, or some people have identified some Saxon stonework in this wall at this point. And the reason why that is important is that this was thought to be a structure that was built in response to William the Conqueror's invasion, you know, something to a stronghold against his invasion. And but if there's Anglo-Saxon material in there, it indicates that this could be an older structure. And you remember me saying earlier about how I couldn't think of a more sensible place for the Vikings to have come. If there was Anglo-Saxon stonework here, it raises the possibility that this was a suitable place, that there might have been something here for the Romans, the Vikings, to come to as a stronghold within the walls of Exeter. And we know from the Anglo-Saxon chronicles that they did come to, I think it's described as a castellum at Exeter. So either the whole of Exeter was a castellum, which seems unlikely, although it was a walled city, or this was the castellum, or there was a castellum somewhere else that we haven't found in Exeter. But coming back to the fact that we're finding Anglo-Saxon, or somebody has claimed to have found Anglo-Saxon stonework, it does suggest that this was the most likely place for the Vikings to have come, and for Alfred to have come after them and basically forced them to leave after having allowed them to overwinter for some reason we don't know, presumably part of the deal. So if you were to go up here and through there, which we're not going to do, which we're not going to do, you come into the inside of Rougemont Castle grounds, and which was some people might now know it as Exeter Castle, and it's a lovely parkland and so on.
Lovely park here as well.
Yes,
Northern Hay Gardens.
There's a war memorial down there.
Beautiful.
There's the railway lines down there. Very easy to get here. You just come out of Exeter Central train station, turn left and left again up a hill. And you know, it's always interesting to look at these sites on hills. Sites on hills I've always found in settlements are usually significant, for defensive purposes, sometimes for religious or burial purposes. This is a significant spot to come.